Thank you, first of all, Sanjay sir, for having me here, Ridhima. And I realized I would have loved to talk from my heart, but with the paucity of time, I think 10 minutes, articulation is a little difficult for me in that sense. So I'm going to read a lot of it. So I want to start with a small story. Bharat, one of the earliest rulers of a land, believed he was the first one to conquer it. He wanted to carve his name on the slopes of Mount Meru. But when he reached the top, he saw hundreds of names already inscribed, and each one believed that they were the first ones to do so. This story, in its essence, captures something fundamental about the Indian ethos, that we exist within a canvas of infinity. Nothing is unique or new. Everything has happened before, and everything will happen again. So in this vast continuum, where does PurpleInk stand? Over the last 14 years in our practice, we began to realize that our sense of belonging has always come from things that we've experienced, our culture. If you look back in the 50s and 60s and 70s rather, art, architecture, cinema and music reflected not just what time we were in, but it also shaped into who we became. In its essence, they shaped culture. Somewhere along the way, we began to feel that architecture wasn't holding the same cultural weight, especially in its public realm. But if you look at where India is right now, I think there's something extraordinary happening, right? Food, beverage, textiles, experiences are becoming more and more homegrown, more India forward, more precise. And while all this is happening, we kept asking ourselves, why is architecture still operating in silos? So where is architecture, in essence, becomes a very deeply personal question for us. And for someone who's always looked at the idea of architecture having the possibility to shape culture, we said, is it possible to change the narrative now? Can culture shape architecture? We started diving in a little deeper and said, can PurpleInk evolve into a cultural practice rather than just an architectural practice? Because culture was also the reason for our origin. 2011, Metallica played for the very first time in India, and this was in Bangalore. Aditi and I were there, and we realized and felt that we wanted our practice to carry the same raw energy, that intensity, and work with authenticity. Somewhere we realized in these last 10 years or 12 years that our work has we've never been able to separate or draw a clear line between architecture, landscape and interiors. And maybe that was always the point, to see space as one continuous conversation. So we decided to pivot and start looking at ourselves as a cultural practice. So projects would no longer be driven by architecture alone. He said, is it possible that architecture starts becoming part of something larger, a larger ecosystem? So each project now that we're doing goes through a particular framework that's holding PurpleInk, then becomes the mothership, and everything else becomes mediums within it. So there's a possibility that projects start becoming something larger than that they are supposed to be. I'm going to talk to you all about what we're doing right now, and just briefly explaining you all what I'm trying to say or what we're trying to do through the different mediums that we're looking at. We created seed first, and this is where we define the cultural premise of a project before architecture begins. Simple example of one of our projects that we're doing, that's Bengaluru. One of our clients had 11 sites across the north part of Bangalore, and we began building a docket that does two things. One is to see land not as isolated parcels, but as a network where programs can speak to each other. Two, to build with specificity, where each project responds to a clearly defined age group with a distinct intent and energy. And then we decided to organize these into clusters so that they don't operate in silos. If I could zoom in a little bit, this is cluster 1, which essentially sits at the foothills of Nandi Hills. And we began by understanding who comes here. It's usually a larger, younger demographic which essentially loves to drive down every weekend. And in that, one of the first sites that we're working on essentially looks at the idea of hospitality or a hotel. We call this a Rebel Hotel. Not a large chain, but something homegrown, responding directly to the audience that it caters to. We began by defining programs around Bengaluru's culture, coffee, recording, vinyl, media. All of this begins to define the narrative of the program and pushes to create a hotel that's not generic anymore. This is how we begin by defining a cultural premise for each project. And we make this stronger by asking a few key questions that brings in a lot more clarity into decision making. Developing a program like this for each cluster with clarity could allow multiple architects to collaborate with us and not just have us alone at the forefront. This then moves on to the next medium called the studio. And this is where the premise begins to take architectural form. The studio translates the premise using culture, context, and clarity. Continuing the same example of what I was trying to show you all, we begin by asking, can a hotel enable a cultural movement? Why can't hotels move beyond and become the cultural canvas of a city? We call them hotels inspired by culture or hotels that could inspire culture. Here is a very small compressed version of what we're trying to do in one part of the project. We are looking at a hotel where rooms are no longer just rooms. They're built around culture codes, coffee, music, cinema, media, etc. You choose what you want to connect to. And these become overlays of every single room with subcultures within it. With this intent, we realize that hotels are no longer just rooms with a view. They can be rooms with a purpose. Then there's press. This is the next medium that we're working on. And here, the narrative continues through writing and publications. So what you're seeing here are covers of some of the books that we're working on. Almost like vinyl covers. During this process, we realize something simple. People read differently at different ages. So books need to become age-specific editions. And in this case, these are like zines. And hopefully over time, these can become a collection of cultural fragments. Moving on to objects. This looks at creating project-specific pieces that extend the identity of a project. This goes beyond the idea of a building and making it into something tangible. One object that most of us remember growing up is the flipbook, a simple idea that made movement visible frame by frame. For the German pavilion that we did a few months ago at the Kerala Literature Festival, The architecture demanded slowness, but it had to be built in 17 days. The object in this case is a flip book that captures this tension between time accumulated and time compressed. A small object, but a powerful metaphor. Each object talks about things that it is meant to be, the projects in focus, age groups that it's catering to, making it a lot more tangible. The last medium, the radio. This is where ideas enter public discourse through talks, conversations, podcasts, lectures, etc. One of the things that we're doing is inviting people to share ideas, to have conversations. We've had filmmakers, architects, and of course we're looking to have a lot more people from different mediums come to us as well, like musicians, chefs, etc. from other domains, so that architecture starts giving back and becomes part of a larger ecosystem. At the end, we want the radio to extend outwards. And through our talks and keynotes, which we do many times in a year, we realize, of course, we are not Metallica, but we hope to carry forward the same spirit, honest, unapologetic, and deeply personal. That's the story of what we are doing right now. And thank you for your time.